So welcome to the Test Him podcast, where we talk all things fertility and male factor fertility. Today we're talking about DNA fragmentation. I'm Toby Trice, and I'm joined here by the wonderful Ian Stones and Michael Close.
Hello.
Hello.
How are you keeping, all right?
Yeah, good. What a big subject this is.
Yeah, DNA fragmentation, very scary long word that you go, what is that?
It's good.
And could be controversial as well.
Could be controversial.
Could
It
be
is controversial. Could be. It is. Really,
It is.
isn't it?
No,
It
I
is
think it is.
controversial.
I think it
Yeah.
is, but yeah.
So we're trying not to get too technical today, but
I'll find that difficult.
yeah, but we've got Michael here.
Yeah. I think what I suggest in this podcast is grab yourself a drink, sit yourself down somewhere quiet and listen up, because it's quite an interesting one, this one, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And actually, before we do get stuck in, it's probably worth pointing out we've got a couple of articles on the website, so testhim.com on the news page. We've got one that I've written, and we've got one from a guest article from Jonathan Ramsey. So
A legend.
the legend. So if you want follow-up info from this podcast, then head over to our website and read a bit more, because I'd imagine it will probably get your brains whirring a bit, this one.
Totally. Yeah. So some people that will be tuning into this podcast today may not have heard about DNA fragmentation. People tune in probably will be aware of a basic semen analysis. So how many you got, what their shape's like, are they swimming? Pretty straightforward and simple. But really what's really important with sperm is the little bit of DNA that they pack. They pack an almighty punch of information, don't they, for the egg at conception. And that little packet of DNA is so important for creating life that actually the outer shell really does the job to get them there. But it's the DNA that goes.
It's the vehicle.
Let's do our job. Yeah, let's do our job. So I suppose really I'm going to put this to you guys, because you guys are a bit more professional people than I am. I'll say this quietly. What is DNA fragmentation?
Go on, Michael.
Well, I think we have to sort of look at what is DNA first. So what is DNA?
Right.
Well, DNA is the backbone of every message and every chemical structure that we are as people today. So it is the
blueprint, isn't it?
It's the blueprint. It's absolutely the blueprint. And the DNA was sort of discovered, and we understand quite a bit about DNA, but it's based on chromosomes, and those chromosomes split, and then they've got to match and pair with the female egg sort of chromosomes to make a new individual person entity in that reproductive cycle. So before we get there, so we know that DNA has packed with code. It's huge amounts of code, and it's 4 base pairs in different structures. But ideally, it's a double helix, and it should be a solid double helix with all of that information packed in. So that's
lost me now. That's it.
So
Double base pairs. You lost me.
Well, think of a ladder. So think of a ladder.
Oh, there you go. As an ex-firefighter, that works for me.
Yeah. It's just a very long twisted ladder and compacted in into a ball, and that is the package that needs to be delivered into the egg, and then that gets unravelled. The egg sort of recognises it, then splits it, and then encodes a new person. So that's really what it is. It's just a ladder.
That was excellent. That was really good.
I like that.
It's just a ladder.
It blows my mind, doesn't it, when you think us sat here right now as speaking individuals, and we all look very different, but we're ultimately humans. We've got 2 arms, 2 legs, and head, lungs, a heart, etc. But each one of us has got such unique DNA that makes us who we are. And there's, I don't know how many, what's the amount of combinations of what that is? I have no idea. It's incredible, isn't it?
The nth degree of variation, isn't it? Really?
Yeah, but DNA is us.
It is.
Yeah,
it is.
It's us.
It's the backbone.
Yeah. So it's as you said, Toby, like the sperm, they're just the vehicle to carry the male part of the DNA to meet the egg.
Yeah.
And of course, it's very, very tightly packed inside the head of the sperm, isn't it?
Correct. Yeah.
So it's kind of that ladder, like I said, it's been crunched up and twisted round and packed really, really tightly inside the head of that sperm.
Yep.
So what is DNA fragmentation then? What's going on with that ladder?
So what can happen with that ladder? Where it can go wrong is that there's a number of different factors that can insult that DNA, that ladder that's inside
Insult
there.
it. What's it
Insulted.
Call it names.
I think you can call it names. There's lots of chemical names that certainly will insult the ladder and start, sort of changing its appearance and breaking some of the pairs and various other bits and pieces. But fundamentally, I think what we've got to go back to is the sperm itself. A sperm, we create millions and millions as guys and continuously make them. But they are the smallest cell in the body, but they are the most vulnerable cell in the body for attack. And if you think about it, they are little swimmers. They've got to run or swim like the equivalent of a marathon or a triathlon or a strongman type contest. And inevitably, not all of those will actually get to the end goal. It is a matter of percentages that actually get there. So and they're not all made equally either. So some we know that sperm can have quite a lot of different characteristics in terms of motility and speed and count and concentration, and they all have a different ability in sort of the track that they would normally be in. But what can happen through the production of sperm is that they may not be produced correctly. It could be a slow production, there could be a fast production, and if that production is not viable, then some of the building blocks can get pushed into the wrong ones. So you start making these base pairs, and they just don't actually get put together correctly. So you can start having... So
the ladder's been made a bit wonky.
Yeah, the ladder's a bit wonky, and it's a bit vulnerable to attack. And then when you think about the sort of maturation process, if you haven't got the right chemicals or the right sort of nutrients that supports its sort of growth and cellular sort of function, then actually the DNA can actually not compress properly from where it's created, and therefore is dysfunctional. So the sperm becomes dysfunctional, but also the integrity of the DNA is less able to sort of communicate what the messages it's supposed to be communicating when it does get to the egg, if it does get there.
So there's a few kind of errors on the blueprint.
So there's errors on the blueprint,
mixing our analogies here, but I'm a guy that thrives on analogies. It helps me understand complex stuff.
Yeah, so it is quite complex, but it is under an environment where you need a good balance in the production cycle as well. So where a sperm cell itself needs to develop over the course of about 72 days to the collection duct before it's available for sort of like the ejaculatory process and fertilization and things like that to take place. But along that pathway, about a third of the way down, is the maturation process, and this is where it uptakes all the nutrients from the epididymal type of area. And if there isn't the right nutrients, then it just will not function properly. You won't get the motility, you might not get the shape. They become dysfunctional, and they won't do the job that they are supposed to be designed to do. And in doing so, the chemicals that can be present can be quite toxic to the sperm and actually denature the sperm cells themselves, or the DNA integrity of the sperm, which is what we call DNA fragmentation. And DNA fragmentation could be a single chain break or a double strand break, or mismatched bases. That's what we call. So the actual messages that should be decoded doesn't get decoded correctly. So the egg has to do a lot of repair to actually work out, hold on a minute, that bit goes there, and it's a little bit of like a jigsaw trying to put it together.
I've now got pictures of Lego. So I've got pictures of an egg with all this different coloured Lego, and it's all got a bit mixed up. And it's like, oh, hang on a minute, I've got to try and make half a baby out of this. How do I do it?
Yeah, exactly.
Is it kind of like that?
It is. So it's like a big ladder, but it gets truncated, so that you can't actually see which part needs to be matched with the other part. So like Lego, if you've got a blue one and a red one or a green one, they don't actually add together very well or structurally. So that's where when you're trying to create a baby, the egg might just disintegrate before it becomes like a proper embryo.
Can't work with this.
No.
Which is what happens really. So that's kind of almost sounds like a factory process that's causing problems with the DNA within the head of the sperm. What else might damage the DNA in the head of the sperm?
So we know that there's a number of issues medically that can contribute to that condition. So we know things like infection, for example. Infection, we get a lot of prostaglandins and a lot of chemicals that are released, which is really to try and destroy and kill cells which shouldn't be there present. And in doing so, if you do have an infection, like a cold or a flu or something like that, you can severely see that that the sperm count and concentration will reduce quite dramatically. But also the integrity of those sperm will be poorer than when you're fit and healthy.
But we're also talking sexually transmitted infections here as well, with kind of your chlamydias, gonorrheas, and other sort of bacteria that might be present.
There might well be, but there can be some underlying commensal, infections which are common but don't cause any illness at all. So most people think of infections as STDs and things like that, which can be quite nasty, that will need treating. But there can be infections, underlying conditions, which are, you feel perfectly healthy, but it could be something sitting in your urinary tract that could be having an impact on the quality of your sperm.
Yeah. So infection, obviously the factory not making things right. What else might be causing DNA fragmentation?
So the other things which are really quite common is inflammation. So if you've got any gastric inflammation, again, you start to see inflammatory factors, interleukins in particular, that can damage cells. They become oxidative in nature, so it becomes in effect more acidic or toxic to the cells, and those sperm cells are very vulnerable to those types of environments.
So kind of inflammation, we're talking like IBS, Crohn's disease, anything like that in stomach or anywhere else, or any other type of inflammation, general inflammation. So it's worth understanding if you've got any gastric problems. Certainly, if you're taking proton pump inhibitors, for example, very commonly taken, just to reduce the acid in the stomach. Those medicines actually can have an impact on your sperm health as well. Yeah, and of course the big ones that always come up and get mentioned. I mean, some people, this might be news to them, but there'll be other people that have heard of DNA fragmentation, and they then have probably heard the term oxidative stress and maybe varicocele. I think these are the big ones, aren't they, that kind of go hand in hand with DNA fragmentation.
Yeah.
How do they come into play here?
Crikey. So I think what's estimated with DNA fragmentation, that up to 80% of the reasons for high DNA fragmentation could be down to oxidative stress. And what we see with oxidative stress is that there can be a lack of antioxidants that are coming from nutrition. So when we look at our general well-being, if we've got a pretty poor diet and we're taking ready foods rather than natural foods and rainbow foods and so forth, they can be packed with nitrates and various other chemicals, artificial chemicals and preservatives, which can create this oxidative stress because they can't release the amount of antioxidants that would normally be there. The other interesting aspect is age, actually. So as we grow older, we absorb less of the nutrients that we're taking from our diet. So you can have exactly the same diet, but as we get older, we're not absorbing them through the gut as equally as we would be when we're younger. And what is known about that is that there is an incremental increase in DNA fragmentation just with age. That's without any other cofactor, because our diet, we're not absorbing the amount of antioxidants, nutrients from minerals and vitamins that we would be doing normally. So we can have a slight insufficiency rather than deficiency of general nutrition.
Gosh, it sounds a bit more doom and gloom now, isn't it, as you get old?
I know. We've just got to look after ourselves, basically.
Yeah.
That's an interesting thing, because you quite often hear on public forums and people saying, it doesn't matter how old you are as a man because you just produce sperm. But actually, what you just said then actually is quite important, because age can affect sperm health.
Yeah, and it's equally the same as women. So men getting to the age of 35 and not having children earlier will experience a higher risk factor for not being able to conceive naturally. It's a fact, and there are other cofactors, obviously, not just diet, nutrition, and drinking alcohol, but things like smoking, in particular, and doing particular pieces of exercise which can have testicular trauma. Like cycling, for example. Inadvertently, it's great for you, cycling for your general health, but absolutely
not great for your sperm.
Not great for your sperm.
No.
So you really got to think about, nutrition, lifestyle, some of the occupations as well. Things like, if you're a cook in a kitchen,
in a hot environment, right?
In a hot environment, there are other environments that equally are quite risky. Being a pilot, for example, or air cabin crew, because you're exposed to radiation. Mobile phones in a pocket, for example, you don't even have to go flying to get radiation. It's all around us in our phones. So it's just being aware of some of these factors which can have a direct impact on the DNA integrity.
Yeah. And of course, then varicocele, which for you, Toby, is something that's quite pertinent, isn't it, to this conversation and DNA fragmentation?
Yeah, close to home. This one, that's exactly what I had. I had a varicocele. I kind of was suspicious of having a high level of DNA fragmentation, mainly because when we went through our IVF procedure, our eggs were we had a good fertilization rate, which meant that sperm went into the egg and the egg went, cool, got a sperm, we're now an embryo.
We're trying to decode it and make a baby.
But when my kind of embryos went to like day 4 or day 5, they were kind of just like breaking down and collapsing. They just weren't producing blastocysts, and that's I was told at the time, and obviously some of the experts, some of the legends that I've spoke to since, that could be because the DNA that my sperm's brought is a little bit duff and not very good. But just come back to the original point there is that I kind of had a condition where I had a dull ache and an enlarged vein on my left testy, which was a varicocele vein, that I then had an ultrasound to have it measured and double checked and stuff. And actually I had one on the right side as well. So I had both sides of my testes with a bit too much blood, because that's basically what I had really, is kind of the varicose vein of your balls. And a bit uncomfortable, but it's really, really common in men, isn't it? Really common.
Hugely common.
Yeah, and in terms of male fertility or infertility, it can represent about 40% of the cases. So, we talk about this 1 in 7, couples that are maybe experiencing, fertility issues. In men, 40% could be experience a varicocele, whether it's known type of symptoms like you had, Toby, but a lot of patients don't have any symptoms at all, and are still having problems being able to conceive, and it's often overlooked by a number of healthcare professionals.
It's interesting because obviously the reason why testicles are outside the body is to keep them slightly cooler than your core temperature. And Jonathan Ramsey recently had said something to us on a forum, and it made me chuckle, to be fair. And it was sort of like looking at, if you got into a bath at 37 degrees, you'd get in and go, "Oh, that's a bit warm." It's feel a bit hot, but that's actually your core temperature roughly, isn't it? Whereas if you got in a bath at sort of like 34, 35 degrees, you go, "Oh, that's pretty nice." But if you got in a bath at 32, 33 degrees, you go, "Oh, that's a bit."
You start crossing your legs, don't you?
It feels a bit cool, doesn't it? And so like those sort of temperatures, the sort of 3 or 4 degrees we just mentioned, isn't actually that big of a range, but our bodies really are quite sensitive to it, aren't they?
Varicoceles make that difference in terms of the scrotal temperature, and you basically bake your own balls. Your own
2
blood.
degrees. It's 2 degrees can make the difference.
Nothing, is it?
But
like say, sperm being the smallest cell in the body, they're going to be so vulnerable, aren't they? So,
they're just going to lie on the beach, aren't they? They're not going to go to work.
They get a bit lazy in the heat.
Give them some alcohol again.
I'll have
an ice cream in a minute.
The all-inclusive buffet.
But of course, for you, Toby, what was your semen analysis like?
So my semen analysis pretty much was the same throughout, give or take a few differences, but very subtle differences. But the main one for me was I had a pretty normal sperm count. My motility was pretty okay, within what was considered normal range. But my morphology was always coming in about 2%. And the kind of norm, so to speak, is the ideal number is 4%, isn't it? And each and every semen analysis I did, give or take a few million in numbers, depending on how long I abstained for, the morphology was the one that kind of consistently came back with 2%. And at the time, we were just told to do ICSI.
Because it looks fine. It looks fine under the microscope, so it must be fine. And that is the point, isn't it? Is you can have a perfectly normal semen analysis, and it can all look really pretty under the microscope. Like, there's loads of them, and they're all swimming in the right direction. And morphology is a bit off, but that doesn't matter too much because we can pick out the good-looking ones. a semen analysis tells you nothing, absolutely nothing about the integrity of the DNA within the head of the sperm.
Yeah.
Yep.
So,
And then I went on to have a DNA fragmentation test, didn't I?
you did, of course you did, yeah.
And the DNA fragmentation test showed quite an opposite scenario, in fairness. If you looked at my basic semen analysis, you'd go, it should be about right. It'd be good to crack on. But my DNA fragmentation test actually come back really, really bad. I had a very small amount of my sample that was okay, but everything else that was there was showing quite high levels of DNA fragmentation. And do you know what? I remember getting the results back, and it was you that gave me the results back, Ian. And I remember actually feeling really scared about it, if I'm honest, because I got these results back, and it categorically said that I had a high level of DNA fragmentation, and therefore I've got very low chances of conception. It was, that's the reality of it, right?
Naturally or through IVF.
Absolutely.
Or ICSI.
And I remember feeling so scared about it. But the tests for me that I did really, really helped me out in other ways, because up until that point, me and my partner was just kind of unexplained infertility. That's the term that our listeners probably are quite familiar with that word. Yeah. And we were unexplained, perfectly fine, normal guy, pretty healthy. My semen analysis is all right.
You've got some, they're running around.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, why else would we not fall pregnant? But when we're in our 20s, surely we should be easy to just have a baby. And so kind of that information that we got was obviously quite scary. It was the concept of our future.
It can be devastating, can't it?
Absolutely.
Let's face it.
It's
not an easy thing to absorb.
Absolutely, but I was so empowered with the information that I now have a reason. I now have something that I can
and you
go
can take
by.
action.
And because then I had the diagnosis of a varicocele, which was the likely, not necessarily the only, but the likely cause of the high levels of DNA fragmentation. I took on a really good diet that I kind of transformed. I made sure I was a lot more healthier, cut down tea, because that was my biggest bugbear, and Ben & Jerry's ice cream.
All the hatred in your eyes.
I knew the ice cream would come out.
Not
only was this sperm lying on the beach.
I've never seen you look at me like that.
Ben & Jerry's ice cream, Ian.
Because I was the one that helped you with the diet stuff.
You did, Ian. You did. And I made those changes. I had a surgery to repair the varicocele, so varicocelectomy, which was an interesting experience with the legend Stephen Moser. I'll call him a legend because he's a legend. He's quite a guy.
That's a story for another day as well.
Definitely. I then went on
things. What happened next then?
What happened next? Well,
what was your next point of treatment after your varicocelectomy?
Well, a little bit of a trigger here, and it's good for our audience. But so the plan was to then be retested some 3 months later, with the hope that we've had some form of improvement, and then the plan would then be looking at how good that improvement was and whether or not we
go for another cycle.
That's it. But I've kind of refined the factory, so to speak. But I didn't need to. I cancelled the appointment 2 weeks prior because I'd fallen naturally, which to this day makes me go cold thinking about it. But the really take-home message for me was that was my diagnosis, and
got it diagnosed, got it treated.
Diagnosis
and got a different result.
So simple.
Rather than repeating the same actions without any other intervention.
Totally, yeah.
So what would make a couple think, maybe DNA fragmentation's at play here? What's going to be the sign of? I mean, what we'd say here is actually our mission with Test Him is that this becomes a standard test.
Yeah, that's what we want.
Semen analysis, oxidative stress test, and a DNA fragmentation test. That's what we're driving for here.
Yeah.
But at the moment, you can't get DNA fragmentation on the NHS. You can't get that. At the moment. It is a test that you have to source privately.
Yeah.
So what's going to make a couple think maybe we should go and get this checked?
I think personally, you've got to look at how long have you been trying to conceive, and look at all the risk factors that you can possibly minimise. And if things still aren't working out, then you've got to start thinking: have I had a miscarriage, or multiple miscarriages? Because miscarriage is a sign that there could be something going wrong with the sperm.
Yeah.
It was highlighted a couple of years ago in one of the ESHRE sort of update manuals in 2017. Even with a normal semen analysis, patients that were struggling to conceive when went to have a DNA fragmentation test showed that the DNA fragmentation was high. So there is a direct correlation there in a number of patients that's there. So if you've got any dullness, ache in your test, it's like you were describing, Toby, or, if you feel as though something's not quite right down below in your testicles, go and get them checked. My goodness. And by going and getting them checked, do think about having an oxidative stress test and a DNA fragmentation test in addition to a semen analysis.
Yeah.
Because it's likely that could be a testicular issue. It could be a varicocele, or it could be a cyst, or it could be something else which is having an impact.
Yeah, an infection.
Or an infection that could be having an impact on that sperm production factory and having an issue there.
Yeah.
There's a number of other conditions that should be thought about really in why you should be thinking about doing some of these advanced tests.
So yeah, kind of recurrent miscarriage, repeated IVF failure, because obviously that was your story, wasn't it, Toby? It's like, if the embryos aren't developing well, it's great. Okay, well, we've got 10 eggs, and 8 are fertilised, or whatever.
Which was us. Yeah.
That all sounds great, but if at day 4, day 5 they're not developing well, or if they're just not progressing, or you're having them transferred and then things are failing, it could be a sperm factor.
That's one of many factors, right? Isn't it? It's not just the only, but it's certainly a big contributing factor, isn't it? In development, right?
Yeah, definitely.
And I think from a patient perspective, from my own kind of journey, is that I was at a place where I was about to look and consider having another fresh IVF cycle, which was going to cost me a large amount of money that I didn't really have at the time, and to do some tests that in comparison was hugely different in price, to give me more information that then if I had a problem, I could think about what would be the cause of those, or if I didn't, okay, I can rule it out and it's done, and at least I know my chances are going to be, best placed where I was going to go. So I think for me it was a kind of curiosity thing. After everything that I learned, it was like, well, I need to, knowledge is power. I bang that drum a lot, but that kind of really, let's face it, quite a simple test for a guy to do, gave me so much knowledge.
Well, it opens up a lot of options as well. Once you've had that definitive diagnosis, it means that you've got to have that thoroughly checked. You've got to go to the root cause. What is causing that issue? And normally those can be identified. In some instances it's not, but in most instances it can. And then there are a number of procedures, or whether it's treatment, whether it's surgical treatment, or whether it's medical treatment, that can overcome that challenge. And it's not necessarily that hard, but you may just need that support from a healthcare professional to say, right, let's have a look at the diet, let's have a look at your lifestyle, let's have a look at what you're taking medicines wise. Do we need to chop and change that if you're on prescribed medicines? That may be having an impact. Or do we need to think about something else? And you've got to think about putting a program to get yourself into the fittest process as possible.
Yeah, and I think, like you said, Toby, you were quite scared of getting your results.
Yeah, massively.
I think a lot of men struggle with the idea of facing their fertility and getting these tests, and they've probably been told their semen analysis is fine, and then, okay, here's another test that might show up something. And it is that there is help out there, and there are routes to treatment and routes to support if you do come back with an anomaly or a bad result. So it is, a DNA fragmentation test is a really good kind of indicative diagnostic kind of tool to then suss out what else is going on. It's kind of like it's an outcome test. It's okay, the outcome's not good. Like you said, Michael, we've got to go back and find out why this is happening. And the vast majority of the reasons that DNA fragmentation is happening are entirely treatable. Yeah,
they are.
So
they're not necessarily unknown. They're only unknown if you don't test for it. That's
Yes,
the only
quite.
problem. That's
Exactly
the problem. And if you only stop at a semen analysis, you're not really finding out the truth. And the truth is not, just going down the line of repeated IVF failure. That is not the truth. The truth is find out what the problem is, come to terms with it, get the support. There's lots of support out there, actually. I think we probably missed one of the big ones, which is through the charity. The charity have got huge bundles of information that's accessible through some of the counsellors. But there's also the support group on a monthly basis, which, you guys have been championing since the inception.
That charity being Fertility Network UK, I don't think we actually said what the charity was then, just
yeah.
the charity.
The
We
charity.
know what the charity is.
We know what it is,
They are the charity.
I just want to pick up another point just that you mentioned at the beginning, Toby. It was like, most people, some of you may not have heard of this, but there might be a lot of people that have heard of this, DNA fragmentation, DNA fragmentation testing, but they're being told, well, it doesn't really matter because we'll do ICSI, or, IVF's going to overcome this. Without getting too vocal or too animated.
Oh my goodness. Don't look at me.
I think that's an important point to make here, isn't it? We're banging a different drum here. Our mission with testing is very different. and we want men to get tested and we want them to take action. So I think, yeah, if there's couples out there that have heard, well, don't worry about it, we'll do ICSI.
Yeah, and I've seen it so many times, and it is the bane of my life. ICSI is not the answer to a poor DNA fragmentation if you only look at a DNA fragmentation in isolation. That is really the biggest thing I'd like to say, really, is that you need to look at all of the other cofactors. You need to look at the medical history. You need to look at the semen analysis. You need to look at your occupation. You need to look at any modifiable aspect of your life which is maybe having a detrimental impact on your sperm quality. Modify that. Don't go just for ICSI. And if you do need to go and get support through an IVF cycle, let's face it could be an IUI or an IVF, or it could be conventional IVF or an ICSI cycle, then think about the best embryologists that you can find in those clinics that are going to be kind to your sperm preparation prior to that fertilization process. There are older techniques that are still gold standard that if you've got an impaired sperm sample will make it worse.
Oh, there's another podcast. I'm sitting thinking, I need to add this to the list.
So
we're talking sperm separation. We're talking
sperm preparation
sorting.
prior to an IVF cycle. There are techniques, if you've got an impaired sperm sample that are still gold standard, it can make your sperm preparation for that fertilization process worse.
Keep your ears open for that.
So keep your ears open for that, because there are other techniques that are available that are kinder when you have these vulnerable sperm samples with maybe moderate to severe DNA fragmentation. And ICSI is not always the answer. You can still get a good fertilization through conventional IVF if you're kinder in that sperm preparation process.
Feels like a bit of a cliffhanger, this one.
It does, doesn't it?
It really does, yeah. It's like, what does that mean? What does he mean?
Yeah, well, I shall add that to the list.
Add it to the list.
One to discuss. But I think, hopefully, that's helped demystify DNA fragmentation a little bit.
Yeah, I hope so, yeah.
We've all got pictures of ladders and Lego in our heads, but hopefully understand the importance of this test, a very simple test that could make all the difference.
Yeah, totally.
Check the ladder.
Yeah, check the ladder. and the
Don't
thing is,
climb up the ladder without checking it.
Yeah.
Exactly that. Exactly. Yeah, it's a good point. It's a good point. Be safe, right? And also, you want to give if IVF or assisted fertility is the right treatment after all of these checks. Ultimately, you're just trying your best to give the embryologist the very best ingredients, right?
Best shot, right?
Yeah, that's what you want, the best shot like this one. The puns are coming back out.
We've nearly got through a whole podcast without it.
It wouldn't be a testing podcast.
Just need to get Rod back on here.
Yeah. That's it. But hopefully you've learned something today, and hopefully you've learned a little bit more about what is DNA fragmentation. For some that has never even heard of it, but for those that perhaps are aware of it, you're kind of a bit more empowered to think, actually, that might be something that I need to look at myself. But we've got, as you can imagine from the cliffhanger from Michael, there's so much that we can be talking about. So please subscribe to our testing podcast to just be right up to date with all the latest episodes we've got coming out, because we've got so many exciting things to talk about. So on that note, we'll see you next time.
Yeah, give us a 5-star review, share us, give us a thumbs up, and send us any feedback.
Stuff. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you, everyone. See you later.
Thank you very much, everybody.